Close your eyes, dear traveler. Tonight we journey to one of the most sacred places in ancient Egypt, a hidden valley on the west bank of the Nile, where pharaohs of the New Kingdom were laid to rest in elaborate tombs carved deep into the living rock. We're going to the Valley of the Kings, where for 500 years, Egypt's most powerful rulers prepared for their journey to the afterlife. Imagine yourself standing at the entrance to this sacred valley as the sun sets over the Theban hills. The year is 1922, and you're with Howard Carter, about to make the most spectacular archaeological discovery of the century. But we'll also travel back 3,000 years, to when these tombs were being built, when priests performed sacred rituals, when pharaohs were entombed with treasures beyond imagination. The Valley of the Kings, known to the ancient Egyptians as Ta Sekhet Ma'at, the Great Field, lies on the west bank of the Nile, across from the ancient city of Thebes, modern Luxor. The valley is a natural amphitheater in the Theban hills, dominated by a pyramid-shaped peak called El Qurn. The Horn, which the ancient Egyptians saw as a natural pyramid watching over the royal burials below. Why here? The location was chosen carefully. The west bank of the Nile, where the sun sets, was associated with death and the afterlife in Egyptian belief. The valley was hidden, remote, easier to guard than the visible pyramids of earlier dynasties that had been robbed repeatedly. And the pyramid-shaped peak provided a natural eternal pyramid for all the pharaohs buried beneath it. Between approximately 1539 BCE and 275 BCE, during Egypt's 18th, 19th, and 20th dynasties, the era known as the New Kingdom, more than 60 tombs were cut into the valley floor and hillsides. Some are simple shafts, barely decorated, belonging to minor royals or nobles. Others are vast underground palaces, with multiple chambers extending over 100 meters into the rock, their walls covered with intricate paintings and hieroglyphic texts designed to guide the deceased pharaoh through the perils of the afterlife. The valley contains the tombs of some of Egypt's most famous pharaohs, Tutankhamun, whose nearly intact tomb revealed treasures that astonished the world, Ramesses II, the great builder pharaoh who reigned for 67 years, Seti I, whose tomb is the longest and most beautifully decorated in the valley, and Hatshepsut, the female pharaoh who ruled as king and whose mortuary temple dominates the nearby cliffs. Tonight, we'll explore these tombs as they've rarely been experienced, at night, by torchlight, in the manner of ancient priests conducting midnight rituals or early archaeologists making their first discoveries. We'll descend into decorated corridors that plunge deep underground, enter burial chambers where mummies once rested in golden coffins, and read the hieroglyphic texts that cover every surface, telling stories of gods and kings, life and death, mortality and eternity. We'll witness the discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb, experience the moment when Carter first peered through the sealed doorway and saw wonderful things. We'll explore the theological texts painted on tomb walls, the Book of the Dead, the Book of Gates, the Book of Caverns, that describe the 12 hours of the night journey through the underworld. We'll meet the gods who inhabit this realm: Osiris, Lord of the Dead; Anubis, the jackal-headed embalmer; Thoth, the ibis-headed scribe; and many more. But first, we must understand the context. Who were these pharaohs? What did they believe about death and the afterlife? Why did they invest such enormous resources in creating these elaborate tombs? And how did these tombs, built to last for eternity, come to be forgotten, buried under debris, and eventually rediscovered by modern archaeologists. The air is cooling now as the desert night approaches. The sun has set behind the western hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The limestone cliffs that surround the valley glow golden in the fading light, then fade to gray as darkness falls. You light a torch, or in Carter's case, switch on an electric lamp, a marvel of modern technology in 1922. The flame illuminates the rocky path ahead, leading down into the valley proper, where the tomb entrances await, some marked by modern numbers, others still hidden beneath centuries of accumulated rock and sand. The stars are beginning to appear overhead, the same stars the ancient Egyptians saw, the same constellations they identified with their gods. There's Orion, which they called Sa, and associated with Osiris. There is Sirius, Subtet, whose heliacal rising marked the beginning of the Egyptian year, and the Nile flood. The sky itself was Nut, the sky goddess, whose star-spangled body arched over the earth. Take a deep breath of the desert air, dry and clean, scented with dust and ancient stone. Feel the history of this place, the weight of 3 millennia, the presence of the kings who sleep in the rock beneath your feet. Tonight, we'll enter their realm, walk their corridors, read their texts, and try to understand what they believed awaited them beyond death. Are you ready? Then let's begin our descent. The Valley of the Kings awaits, and the tombs have stories to tell. Chapter 1. The Valley at Twilight. Geography and History. We stand at the valley entrance as the last light fades from the sky. Before us, the valley opens like a dried riverbed, which, in fact, it once was. Flash floods carved this wadi through the limestone hills, creating a natural depression hidden from casual view, perfect for the secret burials the pharaohs desired. The valley is divided into 2 main areas: the East Valley, where most of the famous royal tombs are located, and the West Valley, a smaller branch containing only a handful of tombs. We'll focus primarily on the East Valley tonight, where the greatest discoveries were made. The geology here is crucial to understanding the tombs. The Theban hills are composed of limestone, a sedimentary rock formed from ancient marine organisms that lived when this area was covered by a prehistoric sea. Limestone is relatively soft and easy to carve with copper and bronze tools, yet strong enough to support underground chambers without collapsing. The layers of limestone vary in quality. Some are fine-grained and ideal for carving detailed reliefs. Others are fractured and crumbly, causing problems for tomb builders. The valley floor is covered with chips of limestone, debris from tomb excavation, accumulated over centuries. The ancient Egyptians called this debris the flood, because flash floods periodically swept through the valley, depositing layers of rock and sand that gradually buried the lower tomb entrances, hiding them from robbers and eventually from memory. The Valley of the Kings was used for approximately 500 years, from the beginning of the 18th dynasty around 1539 BCE to the end of the 20th dynasty around 1075 BCE. This period, the New Kingdom, was one of Egypt's greatest eras, when the empire reached its maximum extent, stretching from Nubia in the south to Syria in the north, controlling the wealth of trade routes and tribute from vassal states. Why did pharaohs abandon the pyramid-building tradition of earlier dynasties? several factors contributed. Pyramids, despite their grandeur, were obvious targets for tomb robbers. The theology of kingship had evolved, with the king now seen as more integrated with the gods than the god-kings of the Pyramid Age. And practical considerations. Pyramids required enormous resources and labor that could be better used for other projects. The shift to hidden rock-cut tombs began with Thutmose I, third pharaoh of the 18th dynasty, around 1504 BCE. His architect, Inini, recorded, "I supervised the excavation of the cliff tomb of His Majesty, alone, no one seeing, no one hearing." The location was meant to be secret, the tomb hidden, with the burial conducted quietly to prevent knowledge of the tomb's location from spreading. Of course, secrecy proved impossible to maintain. Workers who cut the tombs knew their locations. Priests who performed burial rituals knew them. Officials who inventoried the grave goods knew them. And despite the elaborate security measures, hidden entrances, blocked passages, guarded valley, most tombs were robbed within centuries of their creation, some within years. By the Third Intermediate Period, after 1075 BCE, the Valley of the Kings had been largely abandoned. The political center of Egypt shifted north to the Delta region. The New Kingdom tombs, most already plundered, were left to deteriorate. Floods filled the valley with debris, burying the lower tombs. The locations were forgotten. The Valley of the Kings became simply another wadi in the Theban hills, remarkable only for its pyramid-shaped peak. Classical writers knew of the valley. The Greek historian Diodorus Siculus, writing in the 1st century BCE, mentioned tombs of the kings near Thebes, and some tourists in Greco-Roman times visited the tombs, leaving graffiti in Greek and Latin. But systematic knowledge of the valley was lost. When Napoleon's expedition arrived in Egypt in 1798, bringing with them scholars who documented Egyptian antiquities, the Valley of the Kings was rediscovered by the Western world. The Description de l'Egypte, published after the expedition, included drawings of several tombs, sparking European interest in Egyptian archaeology. Throughout the 19th century, excavations in the valley intensified. Giovanni Belzoni, a former circus strongman turned archaeologist, discovered several important tombs. Later excavators found more, carefully numbering them in order of discovery: KV1, KV2, and so on. KV stands for King's Valley. By the early 20th century, more than 60 tombs had been discovered and catalogued. Many scholars believed the valley had been thoroughly explored, that all significant tombs had been found. One excavator, Theodore Davis, declared in 1912 that the Valley of the Tombs is now exhausted, but one archaeologist disagreed. Howard Carter, who had been excavating in Egypt since 1891, believed that at least one major tomb remained to be found: the tomb of the relatively minor pharaoh Tutankhamun, who died around 1323 BCE. Carter spent years searching, funded by his patron Lord Carnarvon. He systematically excavated areas of the valley others had ignored, removing tons of ancient debris, finding nothing. By 1922, Carnarvon was ready to abandon the project. Carter convinced him to fund one more season, focusing on a small area near the entrance to the tomb of Ramesses VI. On November 4, 1922, Carter's workmen discovered a stone step beneath the debris. Clearing revealed more steps, then a sealed doorway bearing the seals of the royal necropolis. Carter, with superhuman patience, stopped the excavation, cabled Carnarvon in England, and waited 3 weeks for his patron to arrive before proceeding. On November 26, 1922, with Carnarvon present, Carter made a small hole in the inner doorway and peered inside by candlelight. Carnarvon asked, "Can you see anything?" Carter's famous reply, "Yes, wonderful things." He was looking into the antechamber of Tutankhamun's tomb, packed with treasures, golden couches, chariots, boxes, statues, and furniture, jumbled together but largely intact. It was the most complete royal burial ever found, and it would take Carter and his team 10 years to excavate, document, and conserve everything. But we're getting ahead of ourselves. We're still standing at the valley entrance, night now fully fallen, stars brilliant overhead. It's time to enter the valley proper, to walk among the tombs, to descend into the underworld. We begin walking down the main wadi, our torchlight casting flickering shadows on the limestone walls. The valley is silent except for our footsteps and breathing. The tombs await, entrances gaping like dark mouths in the hillsides, each one a portal to the afterlife, each one containing stories of gods and kings, life and death, and the eternal Egyptian quest for immortality. Chapter 2: Tomb Architecture. Houses for eternity. Before we enter specific tombs, we need to understand their architecture and purpose. New Kingdom royal tombs followed a general pattern, though with variations depending on the period, the pharaoh's preferences, and the quality of the rock. A typical tomb begins with a stairway or sloping corridor. The entrance, usually cut into the valley floor or low in a hillside, designed to be hidden after the burial was complete. The entrance was sealed with stone blocks and plastered over, with the royal necropolis seal stamped into the wet plaster. Beyond the entrance, a series of corridors descends into the rock, at angles varying from horizontal to steeply sloping. These corridors served multiple purposes. Practically, they provided access to the deeper chambers. Symbolically, they represented the journey the deceased must make through the underworld. The corridors are decorated with texts and images from funerary books, collections of spells, hymns, and illustrations describing the afterlife journey. The most common are the Amduat, literally, that which is in the underworld, which describes the 12 hours of the night as the sun god, Ra, travels through the underworld. The Book of Gates, which describes the gates the deceased must pass through, each guarded by fearsome deities. Sections of the Book of the Dead, a collection of spells to aid the deceased. Along the corridors, there are typically several chambers or niches. Some served as storage for grave goods, furniture, food, clothing, jewelry, everything the pharaoh might need in the afterlife. Others had ritual purposes. Some tombs have a ritual shaft or well shaft a deep pit in the corridor floor, which might have served to collect water from rare flash floods, to deter robbers, or to symbolize the waters of Nun, the primordial ocean from which creation emerged. Eventually, the corridors lead to the burial chamber, the heart of the tomb, where the pharaoh's sarcophagus was placed. Burial chambers vary greatly in size and decoration. Some are relatively small and simple. Others are vast halls with vaulted or flat ceilings supported by pillars, every surface covered with paintings and hieroglyphs. The sarcophagus, the stone coffin, was typically made of granite or quartzite, materials harder than limestone, quarried in Upper Egypt and transported to Thebes. The sarcophagus contained nested coffins of wood covered with gold, and inside these, the mummy itself, wrapped in linen, covered with a golden death mask, and adorned with jewelry and amulets. Beyond the burial chamber, some tombs have additional rooms. These might store canopic jars containing the mummified internal organs, liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines. The heart was left in the body, or serve as treasury rooms for the most valuable grave goods. The decoration of the tomb was crucial. Every image, every hieroglyph had meaning and magical power. By painting a scene of the pharaoh offering to the gods, that offering would continue eternally in the afterlife. By inscribing spells, those spells would be activated, protecting and aiding the deceased. The tomb wasn't just a grave, it was a machine for ensuring eternal life. Every element carefully chosen and placed according to religious texts and priestly knowledge. The construction of a royal tomb was a major undertaking, typically beginning early in a pharaoh's reign, so it would be ready whenever death came. A community of workers, craftsmen, and artists lived in a village called Deir el-Medina, about a kilometer from the Valley of the Kings. These workers were highly skilled specialists, stonecutters, plasterers, painters, scribes, who devoted their lives to creating the royal tombs. Work proceeded in shifts. Teams of workers would cut the rock with copper and bronze chisels, pounding them with wooden mallets or stone hammers. The limestone was relatively soft, but progress was still slow, perhaps a few centimeters per day per worker. As the tomb extended deeper, the debris had to be removed, carried up the corridors and out of the tomb, dumped on the valley floor. Once the cutting was complete, plasterers would smooth the walls, filling cracks and irregularities with a mixture of gypsum, limestone dust, and straw. This created a smooth surface for the artists. The walls were then gridded. A grid of red lines was drawn on the plaster to guide the artists in maintaining proper proportions and positions for the figures. Artists would sketch the scenes in red ochre, following the grid and the canonical representations established by centuries of tradition. A master artist would correct the sketches, sometimes using black paint for corrections. Then the final carvers would cut the outlines into relief, either raised relief, where the background is cut away, or sunk relief, where the figures are cut into the surface. Finally, painters would apply colors: black from carbon, white from gypsum or chalk, red and yellow from ochre, blue from copper compounds, green from malachite. The pigments were mixed with water and a binder, perhaps egg white or gum arabic, and applied to the dry plaster surface. The colors we see today, after more than 3,000 years, are often remarkably vivid, testifying to the quality of the ancient pigments and the protection provided by the sealed tomb environment. If a pharaoh died before his tomb was complete, As happened with Tutankhamun, who died young and unexpectedly, the work would be hastily finished, perhaps leaving some areas undecorated or painted rather than carved. If a pharaoh reigned for many decades, like Ramesses II, who ruled for 67 years, the tomb could be elaborately extended and decorated, creating a vast underground palace. Now that we understand the basic architecture and construction, it's time to enter the tombs themselves. Let's begin with the tomb that made the Valley of the Kings world famous. The tomb whose discovery captured global imagination and revealed ancient Egypt in unprecedented detail. The tomb of Tutankhamun, KV 62. Chapter 3, KV 62. The discovery of Tutankhamun's tomb. It's November 26, 1922, late afternoon. We're standing with Howard Carter in a dusty corner of the Valley of the Kings, near the already known tomb of Ramesses VI. Carter has been excavating here for weeks, removing debris from what most archaeologists considered a thoroughly explored area. 3 weeks ago, his workmen found a stone step. Clearing down revealed a stairway of 16 steps, ending at a sealed doorway. The seals, when Carter examined them carefully, bore the cartouche, the oval name ring of Tutankhamun, a relatively minor pharaoh of the 18th dynasty who ruled for only about 9 years and died around age 18 or 19. Tutankhamun was known to scholars but considered unimportant. A boy king who did little of significance, sandwiched between the dramatic reign of Akhenaten, the heretic pharaoh who briefly abandoned Egypt's traditional gods, and the powerful reign of Horemheb, a general who restored order and traditional religion. Why would such a minor king have an elaborate tomb? Carter, despite his excitement, had methodically documented the sealed doorway, then refilled the stairway with rubble and cabled his patron Lord Carnarvon in England. Now Carnarvon has arrived, along with his daughter Lady Evelyn Herbert, and Carter is ready to proceed. The workmen clear the stairway again. Beyond the first sealed door is a rubble-filled corridor about 8 meters long. The entire corridor is packed solid with limestone chips. This is unusual. It suggests the tomb was indeed sealed in antiquity and not reopened. Or does it? Carter notices signs that the corridor was broken into in ancient times and resealed. Robbers did find the tomb, but apparently, the priests of the necropolis discovered the robbery, resealed the tomb, and the location was forgotten again. At the far end of the corridor is another sealed doorway, also bearing Tutankhamun's seals. This is the moment. Carter makes a small hole in the upper left corner of the doorway, just large enough to insert a candle. Hot air rushes out. The tomb has been sealed for over 3 millennia, and the air inside is under slight pressure from temperature differentials. Carter holds the candle to the hole, checking for toxic gases. The flame continues burning steadily, no problem. Then he enlarges the hole slightly and peers through by candlelight. At first he can see nothing. The candle flame causes the hot air to shimmer. Then, as his eyes adjust, he sees what's in the chamber beyond. Strange animals, statues, and gold. Everywhere, the glint of gold. "Can you see anything?" Carnarvon asks impatiently from behind. "Yes," Carter replies, his voice awed struggling to find words for what he's seeing. Wonderful things. He widens the hole, allowing Carnarvon and Lady Evelyn to look through. They see what he sees. A room about 3.5 meters by 7.5 meters, packed almost floor to ceiling with objects, furniture, boxes, statues, dismantled chariots, alabaster vases, golden beds shaped like fantastic animals. It's a jumbled treasure room, objects piled atop each other in apparent confusion, and it's the most complete ancient Egyptian royal burial ever found. But this isn't even the burial chamber, it's just the antechamber. Beyond the antechamber are more rooms, the burial chamber proper, containing Tutankhamun's nested golden coffins and solid gold death mask. The treasury, holding the pharaoh's internal organs in a golden canopic shrine, guarded by statues of goddesses, and an annex crammed with more objects. Carter and his team will spend 10 years excavating, documenting, and conserving the tomb's contents. Over 5,000 objects, many of them masterpieces of ancient craftsmanship. Every item is photographed in situ, its position recorded, its condition noted, before careful removal to a conservation laboratory. Carter sets up in another tomb. Let us step forward in time, past those 10 years of meticulous work, and enter the now cleared tomb, as Carter eventually revealed it. We'll see the chambers as they appeared when the burial was first sealed over 3,000 years ago, understanding their arrangement and significance. We descend the 16 steps and pass through the entrance corridor. The rubble that filled it is gone now, revealing walls of rough-cut limestone. This corridor was never decorated, suggesting the tomb was not originally intended for a pharaoh. Perhaps it was begun as a noble's tomb and hastily adapted when the young king died unexpectedly. We enter the antechamber. Though now empty of the treasures that once packed it, we can see where objects stood, marks in the ancient dust, stains on the floor. Along the right wall stood 3 ritual couches, their frameworks covered with gold and shaped like mythological animals. A cow, representing Hathor or Mehet Weret, a composite creature with hippopotamus body and crocodile head, representing Ammit, devourer of the unworthy dead, and a lioness, representing Sekhmet. Under and around these couches were boxes of furniture, chariots disassembled and leaned against the walls, staffs and walking sticks, bows and arrows, and more. On the left wall stood guardian statues, life-size figures of the king, black with golden kilts and headcloths, holding maces and staffs, their foreheads bearing the protective Urias serpent. These guardians flanked a sealed doorway that leads to the burial chamber. But first, let's explore the small annex visible through an opening in the right wall. This small chamber, about 4.3 meters by 2.6 meters, is accessed through what was originally a sealed doorway, but which was broken through by ancient robbers and never properly resealed. This chamber is the most chaotic, objects thrown about, boxes opened and ransacked, evidence of the ancient theft that occurred shortly after the burial. Despite the robbery, the annex still contained over 2,000 objects when Carter found it. Furniture, games, including a sonnet board, the ancient Egyptian game, food and wine, oils and unguents in alabaster vessels, clothing, sandals, and countless other items. everything a young king might need for eternity, including board games to pass the time. Now we approach the sealed doorway between the guardian statues. This doorway was sealed and plastered, then stamped with the jackal and 9 captive seal of the royal necropolis, indicating that this is the entrance to the sacred burial chamber itself. Carter carefully dismantled the doorway stone by stone, a process that took considerable time, and what he found beyond astonished him: a wall of gold, filling the chamber from floor to ceiling. Not literally a wall, but a gilded wooden shrine so large it nearly filled the burial chamber, leaving only about 60 centimeters of space to walk around it. Let's enter the burial chamber. At approximately 6.3 meters by 4 meters, it's larger than the antechamber but still relatively small for a pharaoh's resting place. Unlike the other chambers, this one is painted. Walls are golden yellow, covered with scenes and text from the Amduat, showing the pharaoh's journey through the 12 hours of the night. The gilded shrine fills most of the chamber. This is actually the outermost of 4 nested shrines, each fitting inside the next like Russian dolls. The shrines are made of gilded wood, covered with protective text and images of gods. Opening each shrine revealed another, until the innermost shrine was reached, containing a massive yellow quartzite sarcophagus. Within the sarcophagus were 3 anthropoid, human-shaped coffins, also nested. The outer 2 were of gilded wood, covered with inlays of colored glass and semi-precious stones, depicting the king in the form of Osiris, arms crossed on his chest, holding the crook and flail. The innermost coffin was solid gold, weighing over 110 kilograms, one of the most valuable single objects ever discovered. And within that golden coffin was the mummy itself, its face covered by the iconic golden death mask that has become the most recognizable symbol of ancient Egypt. A masterpiece of gold work inlaid with lapis lazuli, turquoise, carnelian, and colored glass, depicting the young king with idealized features, wearing the royal Nemes headcloth and false beard, his brow protected by the vulture and cobra goddesses of Upper and Lower Egypt. The mummy was in poor condition when discovered. Carter's team found that the ancient embalmers had used excessive amounts of unguents and resins, which had become corrosive over time. When the mummy was examined, it revealed a young man about 170 centimeters tall, 5'7", who died around age 18 or 19. The cause of death remains debated. Modern CT scans have revealed various injuries and conditions, but whether these caused his death or occurred post-mortem remains uncertain. But there's more to see. Through a doorway in the burial chamber's north wall is a small room Carter called the Treasury, about 4.7 meters by 3.8 meters. This chamber contains some of the most spectacular objects in the tomb. Dominating the treasury was a large gilded wooden canopic shrine, protected by 4 goddesses carved in wood and covered with gold, their arms outstretched in eternal protection. Inside the shrine was an alabaster canopic chest containing 4 miniature golden coffins, each containing one of Tutankhamun's mummified internal organs. Even organs were mummified and placed in separate containers, each under the protection of one of the 4 sons of Horus, deities who guarded the liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines. Also in the treasury were model boats for traveling through the afterlife, shaptis, servant figurines, meant to do work for the deceased in the afterlife. Tutankhamun had over 400 of them. Jewelry boxes filled with rings and amulets, and a bewildering array of other objects. We could spend days examining everything found in Tutankhamun's tomb. The decorated boxes, the delicate alabaster vases, the golden throne showing the king and his wife, Ankhesenamun, in an intimate domestic scene, the elaborate jewelry, the musical instruments, the weapons, the clothing. Each object tells us something about ancient Egyptian life, beliefs, and craftsmanship. But what's most significant about Tutankhamun's tomb is what it tells us about royal burials in general. If this relatively minor king, who ruled briefly and died young, whose tomb is small and appears to have been hastily prepared, was buried with over 5,000 objects, including multiple golden coffins and a solid gold death mask, what must the tombs of the great pharaohs have contained? Ramesses II, who ruled for 67 years and was one of Egypt's most powerful pharaohs. What treasures were buried with him? We'll never know. His tomb, like all the major tombs, was thoroughly plundered in antiquity. Only Tutankhamun's tomb, through a combination of its small size, relatively obscure location, and chance burial by debris, survived largely intact. Tutankhamun's tomb is the exception, not the rule. To understand typical royal tombs, we need to explore others, tombs that were robbed, that stand empty, but whose architecture and decoration reveal the full splendor of royal burial customs and the elaborate theology of the afterlife. Let's climb back up from Tutankhamun's tomb, emerge into the desert night, and walk to another tomb, one of the largest and most beautifully decorated in the entire valley, the tomb of Seti I, father of Ramesses II, KV-17. Chapter 4, KV-17, the Tomb of Seti I, Temple of Eternity. We walk through the darkness of the Valley of the Kings, our torchlight bobbing as we navigate the rocky terrain. Around us, the limestone walls of the valley rise black against the star-filled sky. We're heading to KV-17, discovered by Giovanni Belzoni in 1817 and considered by many to be the most beautiful tomb in the valley. Seti I ruled Egypt from approximately 1294 to 1279 BCE during the 19th dynasty. He was a powerful warrior pharaoh who campaigned in Syria and Palestine, restored Egyptian control over territories lost during the chaotic end of the previous dynasty, and initiated many building projects. His most famous monument is his mortuary temple at Abydos, with its exquisite reliefs, but his tomb in the Valley of the Kings is equally magnificent. The tomb's entrance is cut low in the valley wall. We descend a stairway, then enter a long sloping corridor. Immediately, we're struck by the quality of the decoration. The walls are covered with beautifully carved and painted scenes from the Litany of Ra, a text that praises the sun god in 75 forms, each form illustrated. The figures are rendered in fine raised relief, carved into high-quality limestone, then painted in vibrant colors that still glow by torchlight after more than 3,000 years. The attention to detail is extraordinary. Each hieroglyph is perfectly formed, each figure precisely proportioned, each color carefully applied. This is royal art at its finest, created by master craftsmen at the height of their skills, working in ideal conditions. Fine stone, adequate time, royal patronage. We proceed down the first corridor, which slopes gently downward. The walls show the pharaoh before various deities, offering incense, presenting gifts, receiving the Ankh, symbol of life, from the gods. These scenes establish that Seti I is worthy of divine favor, that he has fulfilled his duties as king and priest, that he merits eternal life. The corridor leads to a chamber, the first pillared hall. The ceiling here is decorated as the night sky, dark blue painted with yellow five-pointed stars. 4 pillars support the ceiling. Their surface is also decorated with texts and images of the king before gods. Beyond this hall, the corridor continues, descending more steeply now. We pass through another chamber, then enter a particularly dramatic space, a shaft room, where the floor drops away into a deep pit. This shaft is about 6 meters deep, cut straight down into the rock. Its purpose has been debated. Was it to deter robbers, to protect the tomb from flash floods, or did it have symbolic significance, representing the waters of Nun, the primordial ocean? A modern bridge spans the shaft, but originally, the ancient builders would have placed planks across it during construction, then removed them. Or not, in some tombs, the shafts were bridged permanently. Robbers eventually crossed the shaft. Seti's tomb, like almost all major tombs, was plundered in antiquity, possibly within a century of the burial. Beyond the shaft, the corridor continues, but now something changes. The stone quality deteriorates. The limestone here is more fractured, with veins of flint and other impurities. This posed problems for the ancient carvers. In some areas, they had to abandon relief carving and simply paint directly on plastered walls. In the worst areas, they left the walls unfinished, rough stone showing the marks of chisels and picks. But the tomb continues. Seti's architects, finding poor stone, didn't give up. They kept extending the tomb, searching for better rock, creating the longest complete tomb in the valley. The corridor slopes down, turns, descends further, creating a path that eventually extends over 120 meters into the mountain and descends about 50 meters vertically from the entrance. We pass through another pillared hall, its 6 columns decorated with scenes of the pharaoh embraced by deities. The ceiling shows more astronomical scenes, not just stars, but also images of constellations and decanal stars. Stars used to measure the hours of the night. Finally, we reach the burial chamber. This is a vast hall, about 10 meters by 8.5 meters, with a vaulted ceiling supported by 6 pillars and 2 additional columns at the rear. The chamber is 2 levels, a sunken floor area where the sarcophagus once stood. It's now in a museum in London, and a raised platform at the rear for additional grave goods. The decoration here reaches its zenith. Every surface is covered with texts and images, primarily from the Book of Gates and the Book of the Heavenly Cow, text describing the night journey and the relationship between gods and humanity. The ceiling is a masterpiece, a double image of Nut, the sky goddess, her elongated body arching across the ceiling, swallowing the sun disk, Ra, in the west in the evening, and giving birth to it in the east in the morning, representing the eternal cycle of death and rebirth. The vaulted ceiling creates an architectural effect that's both practical, distributing weight, and symbolic, suggesting the curve of the sky. The pillars are decorated with images of the king in the presence of Osiris, Anubis, Hathor, Horus, and other deities essential to the afterlife journey. When Belzoni discovered this tomb in 1817, it was the most spectacular find yet made in the valley. He found the alabaster sarcophagus still in place, though the mummy and most grave goods were long gone. The sarcophagus itself is a masterwork, translucent alabaster carved in the shape of a cartouche, its exterior and interior surfaces covered with texts and images from the Book of Gates, so finely carved That light can shine through the stone in places. Belzoni also found something unexpected, a corridor extending beyond the burial chamber, continuing even deeper into the mountain. This corridor, which slopes down for another 50 meters or more, eventually becomes too unstable to follow safely. The rock quality is terrible, and there's danger of collapse. Where was it intended to lead? The speculation is that it aimed for a lower-level burial chamber, perhaps even attempting to reach beneath the water table. The waters of the underworld made literal. Standing in Seti's burial chamber, we're at the heart of one of the most elaborate tombs ever created. The skill of the artists, the ambition of the architecture, the complexity of the theological texts covering every surface, all testify to the importance placed on ensuring the pharaoh's successful journey to the afterlife. But what do these texts actually say? What journey do they describe? To understand this, we need to explore the theology of the afterlife, the beliefs that motivated the creation of these elaborate tombs. Let's examine the texts painted on these walls, starting with the most important, the Amduat, that which is in the underworld. Chapter 5. The Books of the Afterlife. Journey through the 12 hours. We're still in Seti Aveng's tomb, but now we focus on the walls, reading the hieroglyphic texts and studying the images. The walls of royal tombs are essentially illustrated manuscripts, religious texts written in stone and paint, designed to guide and protect the deceased pharaoh through the dangers of the afterlife. The ancient Egyptians conceived of death not as an end, but as a transformation, a journey from this world to the next. The night, when the sun descended below the western horizon and traveled through the underworld before rising again in the east, served as the metaphor for this journey. The deceased pharaoh joined with Ra, the sun god, in his solar bark boat, traveling through the 12 hours of the night, facing challenges and dangers until rebirth at dawn. The Amduat describes this journey in detail. It's divided into 12 sections, one for each hour of the night, each representing a different region of the underworld. The Duat, each with its own challenges, deities, and significance. The first hour. The sun's bark enters the western horizon at sunset. The scene shows Ra in his boat, surrounded by protective deities, beginning his descent into the Duat. The deceased pharaoh, identified with Ra, enters with him. The regions are still relatively close to the surface, still connected to the world of the living. The second hour. The bark travels through the realm called Weners, where fields are irrigated by a river. This is a place of agricultural abundance, suggesting that the afterlife includes productive land that must be tended. Hence the Shabti servant figures buried with the pharaoh, magical beings who would do the agricultural work so the deceased could enjoy leisure. The third hour. The bark enters the region of Osiris, Lord of the Dead, who sits enthroned in his hall. The deceased must be judged worthy. The famous weighing of the heart ceremony occurs here, or in similar contexts in other texts. The deceased's heart is weighed against the feather of Ma'at, truth, justice, order. If the heart is lighter than the feather, unburdened by sin, the deceased passes. If heavier, the heart is devoured by Amit, a composite monster, and the deceased faces annihilation rather than eternal life. The fourth hour. The bark navigates through a dark and difficult region, traveling over a sandy area that must be crossed, representing obstacles that must be overcome through magical knowledge provided by the texts written on the tomb walls. The fifth hour. The bark reaches the deepest point of the underworld, the realm of Sokar, an ancient god of death associated with the desert and darkness. This hour is the nadir of the journey, the furthest from life and light. The texts here are particularly complex, with instructions for navigating this dangerous realm. The sixth hour, the turning point. The bark reaches the body of Osiris himself, lying in the deepest part of the underworld. Ra's light touches Osiris, and there's a moment of union between the sun god, representing life, movement, and rebirth, and Osiris, representing death, stillness, and resurrection. This union regenerates both gods, and by extension the deceased pharaoh. From this point, the journey begins ascending back toward life. The seventh hour. The bark must pass Apophis, the great serpent of chaos, who tries to swallow Ra each night, preventing the sun's rebirth. This is the journey's great crisis. But protective gods, particularly Seth, the god of chaos who here serves as defender, fight Apophis, binding him with chains, allowing Ra to pass. The deceased must also overcome chaos and opposition to achieve rebirth. The 8th through 10th hours. The bark continues ascending through various regions, facing additional challenges but gradually moving toward the eastern horizon. Protective deities accompany the journey. Gates must be passed. Magical words must be spoken, all provided in the tomb texts. The 11th hour. The bark approaches the eastern horizon. The gods prepare for Ra's rebirth. The deceased pharaoh, having successfully navigated all challenges, is also ready for rebirth. The 12th hour. Rebirth. The bark emerges from the underworld into the eastern sky. Ra is reborn as Khepri, the scarab beetle god associated with the rising sun, and with transformation, as a beetle transforms from larva to adult. The deceased pharaoh is likewise reborn, renewed, ready to begin the cycle again. Death has been defeated, not avoided, but transformed into a stage in an eternal cycle. This journey repeats every night for eternity. The pharaoh joins Ra in his bark, travels through the 12 hours, overcomes challenges, is reborn at dawn, then begins again at dusk. It's an eternal cycle of death and rebirth, mirroring the daily cycle of the sun. But the Amduat is just one of several books found in royal tombs. The Book of Gates presents a similar journey, but emphasizes the gates that must be passed, each guarded by fearsome deities who must be appeased with correct knowledge of their names and the proper passwords, all provided in the text. The Book of Caverns describes the underworld as a series of caverns or pits, where various deities and the damned reside. It emphasizes the judgment of the wicked and their punishment, contrasting them with the blessed deceased who passed through successfully. The Book of the Earth, found in Ramesses VI's tomb, describes geological aspects of the underworld, showing the sun passing through the body of the earth itself, emerging renewed. Later texts include the Book of the Heavenly Cow, which tells how humanity rebelled against Ra, who then sent Sekhmet, a lioness goddess, to punish them, but eventually relented and withdrew to the sky, traveling in the celestial cow. This text explains the separation between gods and humans, heaven and earth. All these texts share common themes: the journey motif, the challenges that must be overcome, the importance of knowledge, knowing the correct spells, names, and passwords, the union of opposites, Ra and Osiris, life and death, day and night, and ultimately, transformation and rebirth. The texts are accompanied by elaborate images, registers, horizontal bands, showing the sun bark traveling through various regions, surrounded by protective deities, encountering strange beings, passing through gates guarded by serpents and other creatures. The artistic style is distinctive, figures shown in profile following canonical Egyptian proportions, hierarchical scale, more important figures shown larger, and symbolic use of color. Gold for flesh of gods, red-brown for male humans, yellow for female humans, blue for hair, green for vegetation. Reading these texts and images by torchlight in the depths of a tomb, you begin to understand how the ancient Egyptians conceptualized the afterlife. It wasn't a vague, abstract concept. It was detailed, mapped, described with specificity. The afterlife had geography, inhabitants, rules, and most importantly, it could be navigated successfully if you had the right knowledge and preparation. That's why these texts were painted on tomb walls. They were maps, guidebooks, survival manuals for the afterlife journey. The pharaoh, sealed in his tomb, surrounded by these texts, had everything he needed to successfully navigate the underworld and achieve eternal life. But the texts also reveal something else: ancient Egyptian anxiety about death. Despite their elaborate preparations, despite their confidence in the afterlife, there was underlying fear. Fear of the darkness, of challenges, of divine judgment, of the possibility of annihilation if the heart proved heavy with sin, or if the correct spells weren't known. The tombs, with their elaborate texts and powerful images, were attempts to control and overcome that fear, to ensure, through knowledge, preparation, and divine favor, that death would indeed lead to eternal life, rather than to oblivion. Now let's leave Seti I's tomb and explore another aspect of the valley: the tombs of queens and other royal family members, found not in the Valley of the Kings proper, but in a nearby valley specifically designated for royal women. Chapter 6: The Valley of the Queens, Royal Women's Eternal Rest. We emerge from Seti I's tomb into the cool desert night and begin walking southwest, away from the Valley of the Kings proper, toward a smaller, separate valley about 1.5 kilometers away. This is the Valley of the Queens, Taset Neferu, the place of beauty, where queens, princes, and princesses of the New Kingdom were buried. The Valley of the Queens contains over 90 tombs, though most are simple and undecorated, belonging to minor royals. But several are spectacular, particularly the tomb of Nefertari, principal wife of Ramesses II, which contains some of the most beautiful wall paintings in all of ancient Egypt. The valley itself is smaller and more intimate than the Valley of the Kings, a narrow wadi cutting into the Theban hills. The tombs here generally follow simpler plans than the king's tombs. Shorter corridors, fewer chambers, less elaborate architecture. But what they may lack in architectural complexity, some compensate for in artistic beauty. We enter the tomb of Nefertari, designated QV66, QV standing for Queen's Valley. The entrance is a simple doorway cut into the hillside, leading to a stairway that descends to a small antechamber. Already in this first chamber, we're struck by the artwork. The walls are painted, not carved in relief like the finest king's tombs, but painted on smooth plaster. But the quality is extraordinary. The colors are vibrant: turquoise blue, golden yellow, deep red, pure white, rich black. The figures are rendered with grace and elegance, showing Nefertari in a translucent white linen gown, wearing elaborate jewelry, approaching various deities with offerings or receiving their blessings. Nefertari herself is shown with idealized beauty, slender figure, perfect proportions, serene facial expression. Her skin is painted golden yellow, the conventional color for elite women. Her eyes outlined with black caul, her arms adorned with golden bracelets, her head crowned with an elaborate headdress featuring the vulture goddess Nekhbet, protector of Upper Egypt, and tall feathers. The scenes show her journey through the afterlife. Here she plays Senet, a board game that had ritual significance, symbolizing the journey through the underworld. There she appears before Osiris, offering incense. In another scene, she meets Hathor, the goddess of love and joy, who also guided souls to the afterlife. In yet another, she's depicted as a pure soul, represented by a ba bird, a human-headed bird, symbolizing the soul's mobility. From the antechamber, stairs descend to the burial chamber. This chamber, supported by 4 pillars, is painted with scenes from the Book of Gates and other funerary texts. The vaulted ceiling is dark blue, covered with yellow stars, representing the night sky. The pillars are decorated with images of Osiris and protective goddesses. The sarcophagus is gone, removed or destroyed by ancient tomb robbers, and Nefertari's mummy has never been found, almost certainly destroyed by robbers, seeking the jewelry and amulets wrapped with the body. But the tomb itself remains, its paintings so beautiful that when the tomb was opened to tourists in the 1970s, humidity from visitors' breath began damaging the paintings. The tomb was closed, underwent extensive conservation, and is now open only to small groups with strictly limited visiting time. Standing in Nefertari's burial chamber, surrounded by these exquisite paintings, we see the afterlife vision for royal women. It's similar to the king's journey in its basic theology. The deceased must navigate the underworld, meet the gods, be judged worthy. But the presentation is gentler, more focused on beauty and grace than on overcoming dangers and defeating enemies. This might reflect genuine differences in how male and female roles were conceived in the afterlife, or it might simply reflect artistic choices, with the king's tomb emphasizing royal power and military valor, while the queen's tomb emphasizes beauty and divine favor. Either way, Nefertari's tomb shows that royal women, at least the principal queens of powerful pharaohs, received burial preparations almost as elaborate as the pharaohs themselves. We explore several other tombs in the Valley of the Queens. The tomb of Amun-Herkhepeshef, a son of Ramesses III who died young, shows the prince being led through the afterlife by his father, being introduced to the gods, receiving protection and guidance. The tomb of Khan-Weset, another prince, shows similar scenes, emphasizing the father-son relationship continuing beyond death. These princes' tombs reveal another aspect of ancient Egyptian belief. Death was not entirely democratic. While texts like the Book of the Dead theoretically made afterlife knowledge available to anyone who could afford a papyrus copy, practical reality was that elaborate burial preparations, tomb construction, and the necessary rituals were expensive. Only the elite, royals, nobles, priests, high officials, could afford proper preparation for the afterlife. Common people were buried more simply, often in shared graves or simple pit burials, with minimal grave goods and no elaborate texts. Whether they believed they could achieve the same afterlife as the royals with simpler preparation, or whether they had different beliefs about death, or whether they simply accepted their fate with resignation, we don't know. The textual and archaeological evidence heavily favors the elite, giving us an incomplete picture of ancient Egyptian beliefs about death. But the tombs in the Valley of the Queens do reveal that royal women and children were valued, and that their successful transition to the afterlife was important enough to merit substantial investment in tomb preparation. The care taken with these tombs, the quality of the artwork, the inclusion of protective texts and images, all testify to genuine concern for the deceased's well-being in the afterlife. As we exit the Valley of the Queens and walk back toward the Valley of the Kings under the star-filled sky, we reflect on what we've seen. The tombs of both kings and queens reveal a civilization deeply concerned with death and the afterlife, willing to invest enormous resources in ensuring successful transition from this life to the next, and possessing sophisticated theological systems for understanding what happened after death. Now let's explore another major tomb in the Valley of the Kings, one belonging to a pharaoh who ruled longer than almost any other, who built more monuments than any other, whose name became synonymous with pharaonic power: Ramesses II, KV 7. Chapter 7. KV 7. Ramesses II, the Great Builder's eternal home. We return to the Valley of the Kings, walking through the darkness to one of the largest tombs in the valley. KV 7. The tomb of Ramesses II, also known as Ramesses the Great, who ruled Egypt for 66 or 67 years, from approximately 1079 to 1213 BCE. Ramesses II is perhaps the most famous pharaoh of ancient Egypt after Tutankhamun, though for very different reasons. While Tutankhamun is famous for his intact tomb, Ramesses II is famous for his monuments. He was one of history's greatest builders, constructing or enlarging temples throughout Egypt, adding his cartouches and colossal statues to countless locations, ensuring that his name would be remembered for eternity. His most famous monuments include the temples at Abu Simbel, with 4 colossal, seated statues of Ramesses, each about 20 meters tall, carved into the cliff face. The Ramesseum, his mortuary temple on the west bank at Thebes, and additions to the temples at Luxor and Karnak. He also fought the Battle of Kadesh against the Hittites, which he depicted on temple walls as a great victory, though it was actually more of a draw, and signed the world's first known peace treaty with the Hittite king. Given his long reign and his building activities, one might expect Ramesses II's tomb to be the most elaborate in the valley. In terms of size, it is indeed one of the largest. It extends over 100 meters into the mountain and descends in several stages to a depth of about 30 meters below the entrance. But the condition of the tomb is problematic. As we enter KV7, we immediately notice issues. The entrance area has been damaged by flash floods. The valley's intermittent floods have deposited debris in the tomb entrance repeatedly over the centuries, and even with modern drainage systems, water damage is evident. The first corridors are deteriorated, with some painted plaster fallen from the walls, exposing rough stone beneath. We proceed down the first corridor, which shows scenes from the Litany of Ra, similar to Seti I's tomb. The quality of the carving and painting is high, though not quite matching Seti's tomb. Ramesses II's artists worked quickly, carving faster and sometimes less carefully, perhaps pressed by the enormous number of monuments the pharaoh commissions simultaneously. The corridor descends at a moderate slope, passes through several chambers, and continues deeper. The tomb's plan is complex, with multiple side chambers branching off the main axis. These chambers would have stored the enormous quantity of grave goods appropriate for such a long-reigning and wealthy pharaoh. As we descend, we notice that the decoration changes. The early sections show fine relief carving, but deeper sections are only painted, suggesting either a change in plan, deteriorating rock quality, or simply the need to complete the tomb quickly when the pharaoh finally died after his extraordinary long reign. Eventually, we reach the pillared halls. The first pillared hall has 4 columns and shows scenes of the king before various deities. Beyond this, a shaft, like that in Seti's tomb, drops to a lower level. This shaft has been bridged in modern times, allowing access to the lower chambers. Past the shaft, the tomb continues, eventually reaching the burial chamber. This is a large room with pillars supporting the ceiling, though the current condition makes it hard to appreciate its original grandeur. The ceiling, which once showed astronomical scenes, has been badly damaged by water infiltration. The walls, once covered with texts from the Book of Gates and other afterlife books, have lost much of their painted plaster. The sarcophagus is gone, probably destroyed by robbers seeking the valuable stone or precious metals. Ramesses II's mummy, however, did survive, though not in his tomb. Like many royal mummies, it was moved in antiquity by priests trying to protect it from robbers. It was eventually hidden with other royal mummies in a cache, a secret hiding place at Deir el-Bahari, where it was discovered in 1881. The mummy is now in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, where you can see the actual face of Ramesses the Great, an elderly man with a prominent nose, strong features, and red hair, naturally, not dyed. Standing in Ramesses II's damaged burial chamber, we feel the weight of time differently than in better preserved tombs. This tomb has suffered from floods, from robbers, from the simple decay of 3 millennia. Yet it endures, still recognizable as a royal tomb, still bearing traces of its original grandeur, still testifying to the ambitions of one of Egypt's greatest pharaohs. Ramesses II lived to be about 90 years old, an extraordinary age for ancient times. He outlived many of his children. He had over 100 children by various wives and concubines, and several of his sons, who were designated heirs, died before him. His eventual successor was his 13th son, Narinta, who was already elderly when he took the throne. Ramesses II's long reign and numerous monuments ensured his fame, but they also created problems for his successors. He had used so many resources, set such high standards for royal building, and made such an impression that later pharaohs struggled to match his achievements. Many simply appropriated his monuments, carving their own names over his, trying to claim his glory for themselves. But Ramesses II's true immortality wasn't achieved through his tomb, which, as we've seen, is damaged and diminished. It was achieved through his monuments above ground, through the colossal statues and temples that still stand today, through the sheer omnipresence of his name and image throughout Egypt, and ironically, through his mummy, which allows us to look upon his actual face more than 3,000 years after his death. As we climb back up through the damaged corridors and emerge into the desert night, we consider the paradox. Ramesses II built for eternity, and in a sense, he achieved it. But not through his tomb, despite all the effort and expense that went into it. His tomb failed, robbed, flooded, damaged. Yet his name endures, his face is known, his achievements are still studied and admired. This raises a question about all these tombs. What was their real purpose? Were they truly meant to ensure the pharaoh's afterlife, as the texts claim? Or were they also, or even primarily, about earthly legacy? About ensuring that the pharaoh would be remembered, honored, and feared by future generations? Perhaps both. The ancient Egyptians might not have distinguished sharply between spiritual and practical purposes. A tomb that preserved the pharaoh's name, that contained texts describing his achievements and divine nature, that inspired awe and fear. Such a tomb served both to help the deceased in the afterlife and to maintain his memory and influence among the living. Now let's explore another aspect of the Valley of the Kings, the process of mummification and the theology behind preserving the body. Chapter 8: The Art of Eternity. Mummification and Burial Rituals. To understand the tombs, we must understand mummification, the process of preserving the body, which the ancient Egyptians considered essential for afterlife success. The body wasn't merely a shell to be discarded. It was an essential component of personhood, necessary for the deceased's continued existence. The ancient Egyptians believed each person consisted of multiple elements: the physical body, Khat, the name, Ren, the shadow, Shut. The heart. Ib. The seat of intelligence and emotion. The Ba. Roughly translatable as personality or soul, depicted as a human-headed bird. And the Ka. Life force or vital essence, represented by upraised arms. Death separated these elements, and the goal of mummification and burial rituals was to reunite them, allowing the deceased to live eternally. The body had to be preserved because the Ba needed a place to return to. Each night, the Ba would leave the tomb to roam the world, but at dawn, it had to return to the body. If the body decayed beyond recognition, the Ba couldn't find its home, and the deceased would cease to exist. Hence, the critical importance of mummification. The process of mummification evolved over Egyptian history, becoming increasingly sophisticated. By the New Kingdom, when the Valley of the Kings was in use, the process had reached its peak of refinement. Let's describe a royal mummification of this period. When a pharaoh died, the body was immediately taken to the embalming house, a structure near the mortuary temple, where trained embalmers, priests of Anubis, the jackal-headed god of embalming, would work for the traditional 70 days of preparation. The process began with washing the body with palm wine and water from the Nile, purifying it. Then came the most delicate operation, removing the brain. The embalmers inserted a long bronze hook through the nasal cavity, broke through the ethmoid bone into the cranial cavity, and used the hook to pull out brain tissue piece by piece through the nose. The Egyptians didn't understand the brain's function. They thought the heart was the organ of thought, so they simply discarded the brain. Next, they made an incision in the left side of the abdomen and removed the internal organs: liver, lungs, stomach, and intestines. These organs would decay rapidly if left in the body, so they were removed, treated separately, mummified, and placed in canopic jars, or in the New Kingdom, often in miniature coffins like those found in Tutankhamun's tomb. Each organ was placed under the protection of one of the 4 sons of Horus. Imseti, human-headed, protected the liver. Hapi, baboon-headed, protected the lungs. Duamutef, jackal-headed, protected the stomach. And Kubisinawif, falcon-headed, protected the intestines. The heart was left in the body. It would be needed for the judgment scene, when it would be weighed against the feather of Ma'at. The kidneys were usually left in place as well, perhaps because they were difficult to remove, or because they were not considered as important. With the internal organs removed, the body cavity was cleaned with palm wine, then filled with natron, a naturally occurring salt, sodium carbonate, and sodium bicarbonate that absorbed moisture. The entire body was then covered with natron, both inside and out, and left to dry for about 40 days. Natron was miraculous stuff from the embalmer's perspective. It desiccated the tissues, preventing bacterial decay, while somehow preserving the skin and maintaining something resembling the body's original form. Bodies dried with natron didn't become rigid like modern freeze-dried items. They remained somewhat flexible, allowing the embalmers to pose them. After 40 days, the natron was removed, and the body was washed again. Now came the cosmetic phase. The body had shriveled somewhat during drying, so embalmers would sometimes pack the subcutaneous spaces with linen, sawdust, or sand to restore a more lifelike appearance. The abdomen, emptied of organs, was packed with linen bags containing natron, sawdust, and aromatic resins. The incision in the abdomen was closed, often covered with a protective plate bearing the Eye of Horus, a symbol of healing and protection. The nostrils might be plugged with wax or resin. The eyes, which had shriveled, might have onions or artificial eyes placed in the sockets beneath the closed lids. The skin was treated with oils, resins, and unguents to make it supple and to add a pleasant scent. Then came the wrapping. This was a sacred ritual, accompanied by prayers and spells. The body was wrapped in hundreds of meters of linen strips, with amulets and jewelry placed between the layers at specific positions, according to religious texts. Each finger and toe might be individually wrapped, then the hands, feet, arms, legs, and torso. The wrapping proceeded in stages, with priests reciting spells as each layer was applied. Specific amulets had specific placements. A heart scarab, inscribed with a spell preventing the heart from testifying against the deceased during judgment, was placed over the heart. A headrest amulet protected the head. An Isis knot, Tayat, and a Jed pillar, representing Osiris's backbone, were placed on the torso. Finger and toe stalls of gold covered the extremities for royals. Tutankhamun had 143 objects, amulets, jewelry, daggers, and other items wrapped within his mummy layers. The final layer of wrapping was often a shroud, a large sheet of linen covering the entire mummy. The completed mummy was then placed in its coffin, or in the case of royals, a series of nested coffins. Tutankhamun had 3. Some pharaohs may have had 4 or more. The entire process took the traditional 70 days, a period that corresponded to the time when Sirius, the star associated with Isis and with rebirth, disappeared below the horizon. Invisible for 70 days before its heliacal rising, announced the beginning of the inundation and the new year. On the day of burial, a procession formed. The mummy in its coffins was placed on a sledge, pulled by oxen or men. Professional mourners accompanied the procession, wailing and throwing dust on their heads. Priests carried canopic jars, furniture, and other grave goods. The procession traveled from the embalming house on the east bank, across the Nile, a symbolic journey from the land of the living to the land of the dead, from east to west, and up to the tomb in the Valley of the Kings. At the tomb entrance, the most important ritual occurred, the opening of the mouth ceremony. This ritual, performed by a priest wearing the mask of Anubis, involved touching the mummy's mouth, and sometimes eyes, ears, and nose, with special implements. An adze, a pesesh kef blade, and others. Each touch was accompanied by a spell. The purpose was to restore the deceased's senses, to allow them to see, hear, speak, eat, and breathe in the afterlife. With the senses restored, the mummy was carried down into the tomb and placed in the sarcophagus in the burial chamber. The canopic jars were placed nearby, along with grave goods arranged throughout the chambers. Then came the sealing. The burial chamber doorway was walled up with stone blocks and plastered. The outer doorways were similarly sealed. The tomb entrance was covered, sometimes with a mud brick structure, sometimes simply with rock chips and sand, hiding the entrance and ideally keeping the tomb's location secret. Guards were posted, at least initially. The necropolis priests maintained the mortuary cult, performing rituals and leaving offerings at the mortuary temple associated with the tomb. Theoretically, these rituals would continue forever, ensuring the deceased's sustenance in the afterlife. But forever proved difficult to maintain. When dynasties fell, when Egypt was invaded, when economic crises struck, the mortuary cults declined. Priests stopped coming, offerings ceased, guards abandoned their posts, and robbers, knowing the wealth buried in the tombs, came seeking treasure. Despite all the precautions, despite the hidden entrances and sealed doorways, despite the curses inscribed on some tomb walls, most tombs were robbed. Many within a century of burial, some within years. The priests of the necropolis eventually gave up trying to protect the tombs and instead removed the royal mummies, rewrapped them, and hid them in secret caches where they might be safe. The most important cache was discovered in 1881 at Deir el-Bahari, containing over 50 royal and elite mummies, including Ramesses II, Seti I, Thutmose III, and others, a who's who of New Kingdom pharaohs, all hidden together in a single tomb, stripped of their treasures, but their bodies preserved, waiting 3,000 years to be rediscovered. Understanding mummification and burial rituals helps us understand why the tombs were built as they were, why such effort went into decoration and texts, why the grave goods were so elaborate. Everything served the goal of ensuring the deceased's survival and prosperity in the afterlife, a continuation of life rather than an ending. Now let's explore one more major tomb, then consider what happened to the Valley of the Kings after the New Kingdom ended. Chapter 9, KV2, Ramesses IV and the later New Kingdom. We walk to KV2, the tomb of Ramesses IV, who ruled briefly from 1155 to 1149 BCE during the 20th dynasty near the end of the New Kingdom. This tomb is interesting for several reasons. It's well preserved, relatively accessible. It was never completely buried and has been visited since ancient times, and it contains important texts, including a complete copy of the Book of Caverns. The entrance to KV2 is large and imposing, with the doorway framed by carved jambs bearing the cartouches of Ramesses IV. We descend a broad, gently sloping corridor, its walls covered with scenes from the Litany of Ra. The quality of the carving is good, though not as fine as Seti I's tomb. We're now in the late New Kingdom, and while craftsmanship remains high, there's a sense of decline, of traditions maintained but not advancing. The corridor leads to a first pillared hall, relatively small, then continues down to a larger pillared hall with 8 columns. The columns are decorated with images of the king embraced by deities: Osiris, Hathor, Anubis, and others. The ceiling shows astronomical scenes, including the sky goddess Nut and various constellations. Beyond this hall, The corridor continues, then opens into the burial chamber. This is a long rectangular room with a vaulted ceiling, supported by 4 pillars at one end. The walls are covered with scenes from the Book of Caverns, showing the various caverns or levels of the underworld, the deities and beings that inhabit each level, and the sun god's journey through them. The ceiling is particularly spectacular. A double image of Nut, the sky goddess, stretches the length of the chamber, her elongated body forming 2 parallel arches. Between the 2 images of Nut are astronomical texts and images of constellations, creating a representation of the night sky. The sarcophagus remains in place, a massive red granite box, undecorated on the exterior but inscribed on the interior with protective texts. The lid is missing, removed by robbers who broke into the tomb in antiquity, removed the king's mummy, and stole the grave goods. But the tomb itself is well preserved, and it's been visited continuously since ancient times. The walls bear hundreds of graffiti in various ancient scripts: Greek, Latin, Coptic, left by tourists and pilgrims over more than 2 millennia. Some graffiti date to the Ptolemaic and Roman periods, after 300 BCE, showing that the tomb was a tourist attraction even in late antiquity. Some of these ancient graffiti are quite elaborate, with visitors leaving their names, dates, and sometimes comments about what they saw. One Greek inscription reads, "I saw and was amazed." Another, in Latin, says, "I, Marcus Julius, came here in the consulate of," followed by a date in the Roman calendar system. These graffiti remind us that interest in ancient Egypt is not modern. People have been fascinated by these monuments for thousands of years. Ramesses IV's tomb represents the late New Kingdom, a period when Egypt was still powerful, but beginning to face challenges. The great days of empire were fading. Economic problems were emerging. Tomb robberies were becoming increasingly common and organized, sometimes with the complicity of necropolis officials. The mortuary cults were declining as resources dwindled. After Ramesses IV, 7 more pharaohs named Ramesses ruled in succession, Ramesses IV through 11. But their reigns were troubled. Ramesses VI had a substantial tomb, KV9, but later Ramesses were buried in simpler tombs or reused earlier tombs. The last burial in the Valley of the Kings was Ramesses XI, around 1077 BCE, marking the end of the New Kingdom. What happened? Egypt didn't collapse suddenly, but a combination of factors weakened it. Climate change may have reduced Nile floods, causing agricultural problems. Invasions by the Sea Peoples disrupted trade routes. Internal corruption and incompetence weakened administration. And the priesthood of Amun at Thebes gained so much power they rivaled the pharaoh himself. Eventually, Egypt split. The north was ruled by pharaohs based in the delta city of Tanis, while the south was effectively controlled by the high priests of Amun in Thebes. The Valley of the Kings was abandoned as a royal cemetery. Subsequent pharaohs were buried near their capitals in the delta, where their tombs have mostly been lost to the wetter climate and urban development. The valley became, gradually, a place of plunder rather than sanctity. Organized robbery gangs, sometimes including necropolis officials and priests, systematically looted the tombs. Papyrus records from the period describe tomb robbery trials, where accused robbers confessed, often under torture, to breaking into tombs, stripping mummies of jewelry, and stealing grave goods. The priests, recognizing they couldn't protect the tombs, began a salvage operation. They removed royal mummies from their tombs, rewrapped them, labeled them with dockets identifying who they were, and hid them in caches. The most important cache mentioned earlier was at Deir el-Bahari, where over 50 mummies were hidden in a single tomb, sealed and forgotten. Over the following centuries, as Egypt was ruled by Libyans, Nubians, Assyrians, Persians, Greeks, the Ptolemies, and finally Romans, the Valley of the Kings gradually disappeared from memory. Flash floods periodically swept through the valley, depositing layers of rock and sand that buried the lower tombs. The valley became just another wadi, remarkable mainly for its pyramid-shaped peak. Some tombs remained accessible. Those with high entrances were those that were never completely buried. Ancient tourists visited these tombs, leaving graffiti, but knowledge of many tombs was lost. Tutankhamun's tomb, buried beneath debris from the construction of Ramesses VI's tomb, was completely forgotten. Its entrance hidden beneath centuries of accumulated rock. The valley slept, waiting for rediscovery. Chapter 10. Rediscovery. Modern archaeology and the valley's rebirth. Napoleon's expedition to Egypt in 1798 marked the beginning of modern Egyptology. The scholars who accompanied the military expedition documented Egyptian monuments in detail, and their publications sparked European fascination with ancient Egypt. The Valley of the Kings became a prime destination for explorers, adventurers, and eventually, archaeologists. Early excavators in the valley were more like treasure hunters than archaeologists by modern standards. Giovanni Belzoni, discovering several major tombs in the early 19th century, was primarily interested in impressive finds that could be displayed in European museums. He used battering rams to break through sealed doorways, removed wall paintings by cutting them from the walls, and shipped artifacts to Europe with little documentation of where they came from or what they were found with. But methods gradually improved. By the late 19th century, excavators were beginning to use more systematic approaches, mapping tomb locations, documenting finds, keeping detailed records. The Egypt Exploration Fund, later Society, founded in 1882, promoted scientific archaeology rather than treasure hunting. Howard Carter entered this evolving field in 1891, at age 17, as an artist hired to copy tomb paintings. He quickly became fascinated by Egyptian archaeology, learned excavation techniques, and by 1899 was appointed Inspector General of Monuments for Upper Egypt, overseeing the Theban area, including the Valley of the Kings. Carter was meticulous, patient, and stubborn, qualities that would serve him well. He believed that despite the valley's long history of excavation, significant discoveries remained to be made. Specifically, he believed the tomb of Tutankhamun, known from historical records, but whose tomb had never been found, was still hidden somewhere in the valley. In 1914, Carter gained permission to excavate in the Valley of the Kings, but World War I delayed his work. It wasn't until 1917 that he could begin serious excavation, funded by his patron Lord Carnarvon, a wealthy British aristocrat fascinated by Egyptology. Carter's method was systematic. He divided the valley into a grid and methodically excavated each section, removing tons of debris down to bedrock, searching for any sign of a tomb entrance. Year after year, he found nothing of significance, a few artifacts, some workers' huts from ancient times, but no tomb. By 1922, Carnarvon had spent enormous sums with little return and was ready to end the project. Carter convinced him to fund one more season. Carter decided to focus on a small triangular area near the entrance to Ramesses VI's tomb, KV9. This area had been left unexcavated because it would block tourist access to Ramesses VI's tomb. Carter believed it was his last chance. On November 4, 1922, a water boy working for Carter's team was digging in the sand to make a flat spot for his water jars when he struck stone. A step cut into the bedrock. Carter was notified, and clearing revealed a stairway descending into the rock. With superhuman restraint, Carter stopped the excavation, cabled Carnarvon, and waited 3 weeks for him to arrive from England. When Carnarvon arrived, they cleared the stairway, revealing a sealed doorway. The seals bore the name of Tutankhamun. They broke through, found a rubble-filled corridor, cleared it, and reached the inner doorway, where Carter made his famous observation of wonderful things. The excavation of Tutankhamun's tomb took 10 years. Carter and his team, including photographer Harry Burton, conservator Alfred Lucas, and various specialists, documented every object in place before removing it, a standard that set new benchmarks for archaeological practice. The tomb's discovery caused a worldwide sensation. Newspapers covered every development. Tourists flocked to Egypt. Tutmania swept the world, influencing fashion, art, and architecture. The Art Deco style, popular in the 1920s, incorporated Egyptian motifs inspired by Tutankhamun's treasures. The discovery also caused controversy. Egyptian nationalists argued that the artifacts belonged to Egypt and should remain there, not be shipped to British museums as had been standard practice. This debate contributed to changes in antiquities laws. Gradually, nations where artifacts were discovered gained stronger rights to keep them. Carter himself became famous, though he never fully enjoyed it. He was prickly, difficult, prone to conflicts with officials and colleagues. His relationship with Carnarvon deteriorated. When Carnarvon died in 1923 from an infected mosquito bite, not from a mummy's curse, as sensationalist press claimed. Carter continued the work but became increasingly isolated. The excavation of Tutankhamun's tomb transformed Egyptology. It demonstrated the value of systematic, patient excavation. It showed that even in supposedly exhausted areas, major discoveries could still be made. And it revealed ancient Egypt in unprecedented detail, not just monumental architecture and royal power, but daily life, personal belongings, art, and craft. Since Tutankhamun, excavation in the Valley of the Kings has continued. Modern archaeologists use technologies Carter couldn't have imagined. Ground-penetrating radar to search for hidden chambers, DNA analysis to identify mummies and determine family relationships, CT scanning to examine mummies without unwrapping them, digital photogrammetry to create three-dimensional models of tombs and artifacts. New tombs have been discovered even recently. In 2006, KV-63 was found, though it contained only mummies and storage jars, rather than an intact royal burial. In 2008, researchers announced the discovery of 2 additional chambers in the Valley of the Queens. In 2015, Nicholas Reeves proposed that hidden chambers might exist behind the walls of Tutankhamun's burial chamber, possibly containing Nefertiti's tomb, though subsequent radar scans have been inconclusive. The valley continues to yield secrets. Modern conservation efforts work to preserve the tombs, controlling humidity, removing harmful salts from paintings, stabilizing structures. Some tombs have been closed to tourists to prevent damage, with exact replicas created instead for visitors to experience. Research continues into the texts on tomb walls, revealing new understandings of ancient Egyptian theology. Studies of the workers' village at Deir el-Medina reveal details of daily life for those who created the tombs. Analysis of mummies provides medical information about ancient Egyptians, diseases, injuries, life expectancy, diet. The Valley of the Kings, after centuries of abandonment and decades of intensive excavation, is now one of the most studied archaeological sites in the world. Yet mysteries remain. Tombs yet undiscovered, texts not fully understood, questions about ancient beliefs and practices still debated. As we stand in the valley, in the pre-dawn darkness, having spent the night exploring tomb after tomb, we see the eastern sky beginning to lighten. Soon the sun will rise, and modern tourists will flood into the valley, cameras in hand, following guides, experiencing in an hour or two what we've explored through an entire night. But we've had something they won't have. The Valley at Night, by torchlight, in relative solitude, experiencing the tombs as the ancient priests might have experienced them during midnight rituals, or as early archaeologists experienced them during their first discoveries. The sun rises, painting the limestone cliffs in shades of gold and pink. The pyramid-shaped peak of Al-Qurn catches the first rays, glowing like a beacon. The Valley of the Kings awakens to another day, ready to share its secrets with a new wave of visitors, as it has for thousands of years, and will for thousands more. Epilogue: Eternal sleep in the valley. As the sun climbs higher and the valley fills with light, we take one last walk through this sacred space, reflecting on everything we've experienced during our nighttime journey. We've descended into the deepest tombs, walked corridors that plunge into the mountain, entered burial chambers where pharaohs once rested in golden coffins surrounded by treasures. We've read the hieroglyphic texts that cover the walls, the books of the dead, the Amduat, the Book of Gates, texts describing the journey through the 12 hours of the night, the trials the deceased must overcome, the knowledge needed to achieve eternal life. We've met the pharaohs, Tutankhamun, the boy king whose intact tomb revealed ancient Egypt in unprecedented detail, Seti I, whose tomb is the most beautifully decorated in the valley. Ramesses II, the great builder, whose long reign and numerous monuments made him immortal despite his tomb's deterioration. And many others, each with their own story, their own achievements, their own hopes for eternity. We've explored the theology of the afterlife, the complex Egyptian beliefs about death and rebirth, about the multiple components of personhood, about the night journey through the underworld, about judgment and transformation. We've learned about mummification, about burial rituals, about the incredible effort and expense the ancient Egyptians invested in ensuring successful transition from this life to the next. We've witnessed the rediscovery of the valley, the early treasure hunters, the development of scientific archaeology, the patient work of Howard Carter that led to history's most spectacular archaeological discovery. We've seen how the Valley of the Kings, abandoned for centuries, buried beneath debris, forgotten, was brought back to life by modern archaeology, its secrets revealed to an astonished world. The Valley of the Kings is more than just a collection of tombs. It's a testament to human attitudes toward death, the fear of oblivion, the hope for immortality, the belief that death is not an ending but a transformation. It's a monument to royal power, to the pharaohs who commanded the resources to create these elaborate, eternal homes. It's a treasure trove of art, with paintings and carvings that rank among humanity's greatest aesthetic achievements. And it's a window into an ancient civilization's worldview, revealing how the Egyptians understood the cosmos, the gods, and humanity's place in the universal order. The ancient Egyptians believed that death was not the end, but the beginning of a journey through the 12 hours of the night, facing challenges and dangers, but ultimately leading to rebirth and eternal life in the field of reeds, a paradise where the deceased would live forever in peace and abundance. Did they achieve this? We cannot know. Their bodies lie in museums now, or were destroyed by ancient robbers, or remain hidden in undiscovered caches. Their tombs stand empty, their treasures dispersed to museums worldwide. Yet in another sense, they did achieve immortality. Their names are still spoken, their faces are still known, their achievements are still studied and admired. When Ramesses II had his cartouche carved on countless monuments, when Tutankhamun was buried with treasures beyond imagination, when Seti the first artist created the most beautiful tomb paintings in Egypt, they were all seeking the same thing: to be remembered, to endure, to defeat death through memory and legacy. And they succeeded. 3,000 years later, we walk through their tombs, read their texts, study their lives, and speak their names. In a very real sense, they live on. Not in the afterlife they imagine, perhaps, but in our world, in our memory, in our fascination with what they achieved. The Valley of the Kings teaches us about ancient Egypt, about death and burial customs, about art and architecture and religious belief. But it also teaches us about ourselves, about our own relationship with mortality, our own hopes for remembrance, our own desire to create something that will outlast us. As you prepare to sleep tonight, having journeyed through the Valley of the Kings, having explored tombs and read ancient texts, having met pharaohs and gods, carry with you the central message of this sacred valley. Life is precious. Death is inevitable. But through our actions, our creations, our impact on others, we can achieve a form of immortality. Not the literal eternal life the Egyptians hoped for, perhaps, but something just as valuable: the knowledge that we mattered, that we made a difference, that we will be remembered. Sleep well, traveler. May your dreams carry you through your own 12 hours of the night, facing your own challenges, discovering your own truths. And may you wake renewed, like Ra rising in the east, ready to begin another day, another journey, another chapter in your own eternal story. The Valley of the Kings remains silent and patient, guarding the sleep of pharaohs, waiting for the next explorer, the next dreamer, the next person willing to descend into the darkness and emerge with stories of wonder.